All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tim Rotak, and I'm here with Rick Jacobs. Before we get into the webinar, we wanted to go through a few housekeeping items, and then we'll get into the main content. For your questions, there's a Q&A box, so please feel free to answer any questions you might have as you go. We'll have time at the end for a Q&A session. This is a new software platform for us, so if we have any technical hiccups, apologies for that, but hopefully it'll all work nice and smoothly. Presentation slides are available for you in the docs section. Also some links to Capella, our a database as a service. There's a free trial, so there's links to that, and our Couchbase playground, also available in the docs area. After this session, it'll be available on demand. And if you're having any audio issues, just refresh your screen. So that's kind of the key getting started points. Okay. So let me jump right into the agenda, into the topic. So today we're going to be talking about building modern applications using both JSON documents and SQL together, right? And the advantages of that. And so I'm going to be covering roughly the first half of the presentation. Rick is going to be covering a demo and more of the technical aspects, and then we'll answer Q&A together. So I think Rick is going to be going backstage, and you'll see him a little bit later on. Okay. So let's just get into the introduction and into the main topics. So to begin with, I wanted to set the stage at a high level in terms of when we talk to our customers and talk to them about modern applications and building modern applications and the requirements that they need, it generally comes down to three areas where we hear consistent themes. The first is about the expectations that they are needing to deliver great experiences for their customers, their employees, in the world where everyone is on mobile, where everyone is using the internet. Things need to be personalized, data needs to be fast and everywhere, and it needs to be dependable, right? Those are the expectations of the users, right? Very demanding, versus, let's say, 15 years ago, right? The world has changed dramatically. In terms of development, right, there's the themes that we hear are around how can we help them make things simpler? How can we help them get to market faster, right? How can we as Couchbase help them leverage the skill sets that they already have in-house? Because there's a challenge with staffing, right? There's a war for talent, and supporting best practices and things like that. And then thirdly is about deployability. As they deploy these applications, they each have their own scenario that they want to deploy efficiently and effectively. Whether that's hybrid cloud or it's to the edge, but it needs to have 100% uptime, and they need to have flexibility in terms of how they manage those applications. So all of these the different themes then tie into and have ramifications for the database underneath, where they're storing their data, how they're storing their data to build those great applications, right? And so the modern database requirements have also changed. As we know, in the past 15 to 20 years, there's been a massive increase in data that has been created, right? And that's because there are more devices, more people online, more people connecting. If you think about IoT devices, that has led to a huge challenge, both in terms of the amount of data and the flexibility needed to design applications, right? Scalability and performance challenges, flexibility to support agile development and modern development like microservices and so forth, right? And be able to deliver those experiences everywhere. But at the same time, there are the best bits of relational that customers are needing in their applications, like ACID transaction support, integrity, things like being able to have consistency in the data, right? So being able to support those critical relational aspects is also important. And Couchbase comes in being able to do all of those things. So why do customers turn to Couchbase when they're looking to modernize applications or develop new applications? It comes down to four key areas. The first, it really revolves around modern performance demands, right? So customers come to us when they're having scalability performances, throughput performances, latency challenges in their applications as they're trying to roll them out to the masses, or just sync data to new locations, or let's say put it in new areas, right? So they're facing those sorts of challenges. The next common theme we see is in terms of agility and flexibility. Uh, Relational databases and mainframes or other kind of older systems aren't giving them the flexibility they need to develop their applications quickly enough, add new features, and deliver those features quickly to market. So that's another challenge. Thirdly is around mobile experiences. We have a lot of our customers who come to us who've already built version 1 of their application, and are struggling with the experiences they want to deliver, the speed of the data movement and storage and syncing and so forth. And finally is related to costs. As cost is always a factor, how can a customer get the performance and scalability they want, deliver things quickly to market, but also reduce the total cost of ownership of managing their applications? So these are common themes for us. And so where are customers using Couchbase as they build these applications? A few particular areas customers are using us in for many different types of reasons, but some things that we see more often than not. Advanced product catalogs, being able to present dynamic information to customers when you have many different products and lots of factors involved, and you want to give them the richest experience you can. Customer 360, personalizing an application to users, user profiles is a big area for us. Legacy offloading. The speed that Couchbase delivers is an in-memory database, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. Really helps customers moving their historical applications, modernizing them in a step by giving them some sort of a stepping stone to speed up an old application and make it quicker, and then modernize it over time. Analysis, big data, operational analytics, and we'll talk about a customer scenario later on, and those mobile applications and field service applications that I highlighted earlier. Okay, so what are the advantages to our customers in building modern applications with SQL and JSON together? It's around developing faster and deploying everywhere and performing at scale. And so let me get into developing faster. And this is really where we get into the document data model. So Couchbase as a data platform stores data in a JSON document format. But in addition to that, we have flexible data modeling scenarios so that we provide multiple layers, and Rick will talk about this in terms of the logical design of the data model that makes it easy for customers to align and design the data any way they want. So they can put in more rigid structures for ACID transactions and things like integrity and how they want to design the data, but also have the flexibility of JSON documents so they can add things over time with, like, let's say, a user profile, and you want to add in new aspects of that user's activity and so forth, and just add that to the document without having to redesign a relational database schema. So that's how data is stored in Couchbase, but how is it accessed, right? So Couchbase queries data in our database using SQL++. And so what this means is that for organizations, who already know SQL, right? Which SQL being the most common query language used today. SQL++ is an extension of SQL. So we support ANSI SQL 92, but the plus plus stands for the analytic capabilities that we've built into Couchbase. And so what you see here on the left is a traditional relational query and Couchbase SQL++, and they're exactly the same. So for developers, but also for other people in the organization who know SQL, this means that you can use the powerful syntax of SQL, including joins across documents, do things like distributed asset transactions, all with a query language that is well known and well understood in the industry. In terms of developing faster, the other area is really what Couchbase brings as a platform in terms of integrated capabilities for across all of what we do. So Couchbase has a built-in cache, which means that customers and developers can use KV to access data in the database, and that's all happening in memory. So that's giving us those extremely fast speeds. We combine that with the JSON document data store and relational capabilities that I highlighted. That's all accessed with SQL++, but also we have built in is full text search. So no need to use a Lucene or a separate search engine with Couchbase. There's an eventing service. So in the database, you can program events and triggers and monitoring mechanisms in the database. We also support operational analytics. So that means that for data that's in the database, it can be shadowed to a separate node, but synced in real time. So there's no need for any ETL process if you want to do analytics on the data in your database. You can run those analytical processes without impacting the workloads of the operational application. Additionally, Couchbase has Couchbase Lite, which is a embedded mobile database, and we have as a platform built-in geo replication. So that means if the data is distributed across nodes, whether that is within a cluster, within multiple clusters, within multiple data centers, we sync that data wherever it is and have that all built in. So all of these things combined make up the Couchbase database platform. It means that customers can get to market faster and more flexibly and add more features into their applications without other third-party products, less to code, less to learn, less to license, less to support and maintain. So that's really where the flexibility comes in. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about deploy anywhere. So in terms of deployment options and deploying in the cloud, primarily as customers look to Couchbase for their cloud deployments, the choice really comes down to, do I want to manage it myself and tune it myself, or would I prefer database as a service where I get the convenience of being able to spin up a node in 2 minutes time, to have all of the things managed behind the scenes that I may not want to? Or am I more interested in tuning my database and I have a team willing to do that? So that's really kind of the primary options for customers when they're looking to deploy in the cloud. I talked briefly about the geo replication. This is a technology we call is a cross data center replication. And with this, what you see is the ability for customers to store data in different regions and in different clusters, and all of the data is automatically replicated around the globe. So this is really driving high availability and making it very easy for customers to do this. Another thing we have in terms of the technology, in terms of deployability that sets Couchbase apart, is something we call multidimensional scaling. And what this means is the different services, some of which I've highlighted earlier for you, don't all need to be run on every single node. So therefore, as a developer, you can develop your application against a smaller, a single node on your workbench. But when it gets deployed, you customers and have the ability, and organizations have the ability to deploy different services on different nodes to match the workloads and get the best usage out of their hardware as they want. And this is whether they're doing so self-managed with Couchbase Server or with the database as a service. You can also do this. So let me briefly get into performance and scale. So Couchbase has been designed to be a distributed database from the beginning. And what that means is that instead of a traditional relational server where you know, if you want to increase your performance, you're buying a bigger box and a bigger box and a bigger box, Couchbase was designed that you simply add new nodes to your environment and data is automatically replicated amongst those nodes. And therefore, it makes it much easier and much more cost effective to scale. And as we go to the next slide, here's just a quick comparison of some recent benchmarking performance we did comparing ourselves to Atlas, right? So in some of the data you're seeing here, we're using the Yahoo benchmark standard for NoSQL databases, and we're looking at a particular workload A. And essentially what you're seeing here is the bars are throughput and the dashed lines are latency. And what you can see here is at 6 nodes and at 9 nodes compared to Atlas, we're seeing much greater throughput in the amount of data that's being processed for those different cluster configurations. But critically, you can see also the latency is much, much better with Capella, our database as a service, than Atlas. And that's based upon the memory first architecture and that every node is active. There's no primary, secondary. And so this is across all kinds of workloads, whether they're heavy read, heavy write, or any mixture of the two. Also, in terms of architecture and availability and scalability, is the fact that as the data is automatically replicated, we're also making sure that we're continuing delivering great service with auto failover. So if a node goes down, we take care of that on the back end. A node will be automatically set up again, and then the data will be rebalanced, right? So this is ensuring that we're getting high availability across our configurations. At this point, I wanted to go into just a little bit more detail about Couchbase Capella because it is the easiest and fastest way to begin with Couchbase. And following this webinar, we'd love it for you if you wanted to get a free trial. We have details on that. But essentially, as a database as a service, it really eliminates a lot of the workload that customers and organizations, developers need to set up and maintain their database. And so what is Capella? At a high level, it's a fully managed version of our Couchbase data platform. So you get the enterprise grade performance, you get the deployment flexibility in terms of where data is located, but leveraging all the features of SQL++, the JSON document data model, but things like automated scale in and scale out, right? So you can make changes to your nodes, the configurations very easily, click a button, add a node, remove a node, change the amount of memory, and the data will then be automatically redistributed and ready to go. And so what does that look like from a visual standpoint? You'll see this in the demonstration that Rick will do in a little bit. But the Capella control plane is where you will come in and set up your trial and have access to a cluster. And from there is where you can see things like the monitoring. You have tools like a query workbench, a document viewer, and it's where you provide your security and other role-based access controls and so forth. In terms of what that means as database as a service, we just wanted to highlight a little bit what that means. So in terms of the type of work that a customer might be doing versus a Capella, if you think about this as a self-managed database or that you would, like our Couchbase server, in that case, the customer would be responsible for all of these different aspects in their column. With Capella, most of these things are either fully automated or semi-automated, and the responsibilities are shared with customers. So a lot of the workload of database infrastructure and database management is taken off the hands of you or your organization. And where is Capella supported? So currently we're in, I think it's 11 different availability zones where you can have your cluster stored, but obviously you can access it from anywhere in the world. And then finally, for me, just a quick customer story. So Facet Digital is a development agency that helps their clients build modern applications, and they switched to Couchbase Capella from a different database as a service. And what they liked about it was the fact that from a data platform standpoint, all of the capabilities that I highlighted before, the document data store, key value access, SQL, full text search, being able to bring all of those capabilities in or have them all available for them made it much easier to build applications and add functionality to those applications. But also in terms of spinning up new clusters and improved speed of query design was a big factor in as they moved to Capella. And now at this point, we're going to be moving on to the demo. And so what we're going to see is Rick is going to go into Capella and give you a little bit of an overview and show you some of those aspects. So let me get into that.
In this video, I'm going to give you a quick look at the Couchbase Capella UI. I'll be focusing on key features like creating a cluster, creating a bucket, which is the equivalent of a table in a relational database, importing data and accessing and querying that data from within the Couchbase UI and also from code. So here I'm logged into Capella. Note that I'm using the paid version, so the screens on the trial version may be a little different. You may not have some of these services that accompany the paid version. All right, so we're in Capella. The first thing I'd like to show is how to create a cluster. So on this screen, we can create a cluster, specify the services for that cluster, the compute capacity, etc., and also pick the plan. The next thing I'd like to show is how to add a bucket. So we've got a cluster created. And now I'd like to add a bucket to that cluster. We can do that from the Create Bucket screen. I'm going to go ahead and add a bucket for this demonstration. We're going to call it Capella Demo. And then I'm just going to stick with the defaults and create that bucket. So there we go. We have that Capella Demo bucket created. Now we need to specify connections. So in order to connect to that bucket and cluster, to the cluster and bucket remotely, I have to add my IP to the allowed IP addresses. Here I can add my IP address and I can specify whether that is a permanent or temporary whitelist IP. The other thing we have to do in order to connect remotely is to specify a user. So we have to specify database credentials to allow users to connect to our cluster. So here I can create an additional database user, specify, the username, password, etc., and then I can specify what buckets this user is allowed to access. One thing I'd like to show is the ability to import sample buckets. So on the tools menu, on the import, I can also import sample data. So Couchbase comes with 3 buckets that you can import. I've already imported the travel sample bucket, and we're going to use that for some queries later on. All right, so we've got a cluster, we've got a bucket, and in order to connect to that cluster and bucket, I'm going to do that via code in the next example, but I'm going to need the code template. We're going to be using the Java SDK. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this code template, and then we're going to use that from an IDE. So now let me log into my IDE, and then we're going to use that code template to connect to the cluster. So now I'm in the IDE. I've already added the reference to the Couchbase SDK here in my POM file. So I'm using Maven. So this is the reference to the Couchbase SDK. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a new Java class. Just going to name it example because that's the name of the class from the template. And now I'm going to override this with that template that I just copied from the UI. Notice that I have to specify the correct username and password and also the bucket name that I'd like to connect to. So I have that already in this credentials file. I'm just going to copy and paste that over. All right. So we're connecting to that Capella demo bucket that I just created, and then we're using this temp user and password. Now let's go ahead and run this code. What this does, this template allows us to connect to the bucket. It also creates an index, inserts a document, and then does a key value lookup for that record. And then it outputs that record to the screen. So this is the record that we entered, and then we just did a key value lookup on that record and got that document back. So now let's go back to the UI and take a look at that document from the UI. So let's take a look at that document that I just added to the Capella demo bucket. As you can see, it has one item. And here is that document that was just added, that King Arthur document. All right. Now let me show how we can query buckets within the Couchbase UI. So I can do that by going to the query workbench. And what I'm going to do is run a query on that travel sample bucket that I mentioned earlier. I'm going to execute that query. And then here are the results for the query down below. But what I wanted to highlight is that this query is in SQL. So this is regular SQL syntax that most developers are very familiar with. There's no need to learn a proprietary query language to utilize Couchbase. It's regular SQL. All right, that's about it. So in this short Capella overview, we've looked at how to create clusters and buckets, how to import sample data, how to add data to the buckets via the Couchbase SDKs, and then how to query those documents via the SDK. And then we looked at how to query the documents also from the query workbench using SQL syntax.
All righty. Thank you, Rick.
All right. So thanks for taking the time to watch that demo. Now I'm going to talk a little more. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the SDK. All right, so an SDK is basically a set of programs and sometimes tools that are used to develop applications for a specific platform. The Couchbase SDKs are available in 10 different languages, and they can be downloaded via the usual methods that programmers use to access libraries. We also offer extensive documentation for the SDKs. We offer tutorials, quick starts, and also sample projects that can be cloned from Git. All right, we have 10 SDKs for most of the most popular languages. For our customer base, Java, .NET, and Node.js are usually the SDKs that we see being utilized the most. The Rust SDK is community supported, and the Kotlin SDK is in developer preview, but it should be GA sometime next month. And again, the process to utilize these SDKs is the same as developers are used to, depending on languages. So for Python, which I utilize a lot, it would be a pip install Couchbase. For Node.js, it'd be npm install Couchbase. For Java, the developer would probably utilize Maven like I did in my example, so add the reference to the POM file. For Scala, I generally use Maven also, add a reference to the POM file, and the more hardcore Scala developers probably use SBT. All right, so here's some common objects that the SDK gives you access to. Most databases give you a connection string when you try to connect a database, so they'll give you a connection string to utilize to connect. But if you notice in the example that I use in the demo, the Couchbase example is actually a full template. So the template gives you access to a lot of these objects. You get a pretty clear example of how to access these objects. In the code I used, for example, first we instantiated the cluster object, then we got a bucket object, and then we used a key value search on a document, then returned that document to the screen. And all these actions were available in that template that I was able to copy from the Capella UI. Developers also get access to things like scopes and collections, which I didn't use in my example. I used the default collection. And then you can specify specific schemas for your data using the scopes functionality. Let's talk a little bit about data organization. So Couchbase allows you to model relational database objects in a NoSQL environment. So this is kind of a dictionary that shows how these objects correspond. A server is equivalent to a cluster in the Couchbase world. A database is basically a bucket. A schema, as I mentioned before, is a scope in Couchbase. A table is a collection. And rows of data are documents in Couchbase. And then the T-SQL is very equivalent to the Couchbase Nickel language that I showed earlier. Basically, the SQL syntax is generally just about the same. Then a primary key is a document key in Couchbase, a unique identifier. So that's how we uniquely identify our documents in Couchbase. We call that a document key, whereas relational database folks would refer to that as a primary key. And then an index is, of course, an index also in Couchbase. All right, so let's talk about data modeling a little bit. On the left-hand side is the relational data, and on the right is the refactored JSON document. In this example, the user JSON document is really a combination of the user skills, and the user experience relational tables. So the relational example is a normalized example. They're normalized into 3 different tables. In Couchbase, generally what you'll do when you refactor is denormalize those relational tables into one document. And this is done because it reduces the need for joins. And then the queries also perform better because you don't have to do as many round trips back to the database to get additional information. All the information related to a particular record or document, as we call it, is within that document, nested within that document. So let's look at an example of T-SQL. Basically, this query is utilizing the AdventureWorks database, and that's a sample database that ships with SQL Server. it's also used in many other database programs because it's easy to install. The query that's shown on the screen returns the first names and last names of all the employees and also the cities where they live. And to the lower right, you can see that data as it's returned. Now let's see how that looks in Couchbase. In Couchbase SQL, the query is basically the same. So if you look closely, the only difference is how the concatenation operator works. So the concatenation operator in relational databases is the plus sign, and in Couchbase it's the bang. Other than that, these queries are basically the same. All right, let's talk a little bit about transactions. SQL transactions have been around for quite some time in the relational world. They're basically a set of actions in one transaction. And these actions have different save points. So if all the instructions are successful for any given transaction, then the full transaction runs and there's no rollback. But if at some point some of these statements fail, then they are set to roll back to specific data points. Here is an example of what a transaction looks like. So as you can see, it has several updates and some SQL select statements, and then the rollback or save points. Each statement is atomic, so either the full statement gets executed or it rolls back to the above save point, which is basically a safe position for that data to roll back to. And I'll talk a little bit more of that in the next slide. The SQL code for transactions in Couchbase, as you can see, is basically the same as it is in relational databases. So once again, just reinforcing the theme of Couchbase allows you to use relational database functionality in a NoSQL database. So we had that with scopes and collections that we saw earlier, and now with these transactions that use basically the same SQL that you would utilize in a relational database. All right. So in the real world, use cases like dynamic inventory updates and purchasing and shipping confirmations generally utilize transactions. But as an example, let's just walk through the registration confirmation example that's shown here. The issue with this would be an incomplete registration, right? So for example, if you sign up for an account on an e-commerce site, that sign-up process has several steps. But if you lose your connection to the site or accidentally log off, or for whatever reason, you are unable to complete the registration, then that could possibly break the database integrity. So developers generally wrap those statements within a transaction and in order to have that process proceed, right? Depending on the scenario, it'll have rollbacks like we had in the example that I showed previously, or it may be an all or nothing scenario where the full transaction gets completed. And if it's not fully completed, every step, then it just rolls back to nothing. So it's an all or nothing approach that some developers utilize. All right, let's talk about next steps. Basically, the next steps from this point would be to utilize the 30-day free trial that we offer for Capella, and that can be accessed at couchbase.com/Capella. The trial gives you a tutorial that walks you through some of the functionality that I showed in my demo earlier. And then once you're complete with the trial, we'd like to invite you, obviously, to step up to the full Capella version, and that is available via a pay-as-you-go model. We also offer starter kits that are basically a bundle of Capella credits along with some professional services to help you get started. And those bundles tend to be very popular with our Capella clients. So thanks again for attending. And now we'll wrap this up by answering some of your questions.
All right. Hi, Rick. I'm back on stage here with our new platform. So thank you for all that information. I wanted to get into a few of the questions that I've seen. And if you have more questions, please post them in the Q&A box. The first question that I wanted to address that came up by one or two people was SQL++ versus Nickel or N1QL. So if you know Couchbase, a bit longer than maybe someone who's new to Couchbase, you'll have heard of our Nickel query language, which is the same as SQL++. SQL++ is how we're referring to it going forward. So it's a bit of a rebrand essentially, but it is not a different query language. It's from our standpoint, it's just we realize that as more and more people are coming into the Couchbase world, that SQL++ will be a bit more familiar in terms of a naming standpoint. But if you see Nickel and you see SQL++ in the short term, as we're going through this process, know that they're exactly the same thing. There's no differences from one to the other. It's purely a naming thing. So Rick, let me go into some of the questions here. First one I see is in terms of Couchbase and the interface. Can you talk a little bit about how an application can connect directly through the API?
Yeah, sure. So you can connect using the SDKs like I showed. You can also connect using the Couchbase CLI, which is a command line interface that allows you to access a lot of functionality directly from the command line.
And what's the advantage of doing that versus, let's say, the SDK?
Well, you get a direct connect. The language isn't necessarily specific, so you can do things like curl commands and issue those directly to the CLI.
Right. So, and it's more for KV access, right? Where people are getting quicker connection.
Yeah, I mean, it can be used for KV. You can also send SQL strings via the curl commands, but the idea is, you're correct. It's a little bit faster, and it might be easier for folks that are used to dealing with CLI type interfaces.
Okay, great. I'm just looking here. So how does Couchbase provide notification to client apps on change data capture related to push manner? Can you talk about that?
So I have done some demos myself with change data capture. What I used was a tool called NiFi. In Couchbase, there are ways to do it. Generally, you would have to set that up with a Couchbase query. So a UDF, user-defined function, could be set up in Couchbase to get that functionality.
Okay. There's a question here. Are there any tier 1 companies using Couchbase? In fact, more than 30% of the Fortune 100 uses Couchbase for a lot of their mission critical applications. So just to name a few, if we look at FICO, which FICO is an agency that does the monitoring agency behind 65% of the world's credit cards and 90% of the United States credit cards. They handle the fraud detection, and they are using Couchbase to do that. And they need millisecond, low 10 millisecond performance to do that that fraud detection. They're using Couchbase. But we have a wide range of, if you call tier 1 or Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 companies. If you go to the Couchbase website and go to the customer section under resources, I believe it is, you will find across different verticals and across different technologies, the different customers in different areas. So you'll find a lot of different customer examples and videos and so on, who's using Couchbase, to name just a few. So let's see here. Sorry, the questions are a little bit small in terms of font, so that's what I'm having a hard time reading. So Rick, in terms of switching from on-prem version to going to a hosted Capella, how hard is it to sync data, or can you talk about that process?
Well, the way to move the data over would be utilizing the change data capture. I'm sorry, the XDR functionality that Couchbase offers. Or you could write code that actually grabs that data from one cluster and moves it over to another. So there's a few different ways you can handle that.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to do. We're actually publishing a short guide probably in the next couple of weeks with details on that. I think the big thing to think about is that Capella currently is using version 7 of the Couchbase database. So for customers who are on an older version of the database, I think what makes sense in terms of syncing data across is moving into a version 7 and then using the XDCR or replication technology that Rick mentioned, or just doing a database backup and move over. But yeah, we'll be publishing a guide that with a lot of details on how to do that.
And Tim, like I mentioned, you could also just do that in code, right? So utilizing whichever one the SDK is you're familiar with or comfortable with. So Java, for example, which is what I use in my demo, I could have connected to one Couchbase cluster and moved that data over to another one, again, using the SDK. So that's also an option.
Okay. Rick, there's a question for you about, can multiple services be updating different parts of a single document at the same time?
So technically that's problematic, right? So you don't want documents being able to be updated at the same time. You usually want to have those documents locked so that they can only be accessed one at a time by one service at a time. With Couchbase Analytics, what it does is it makes a whole replica of the data. So in Couchbase Analytics, you can be working with the data from the analytics service and also be working on it from the query service because it's separated.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question on, do you know the current version of PHP Couchbase is certified to run on? I'm sure it's on our doc site, but do you happen to know off the top of your head?
I don't. I tend to program in a lot of different languages. Well, but PHP is not one of the languages that I play with. So that question I don't know the answer to. But as you mentioned, it's probably easy to find. Just go to couchbase.com, look for the PHP SDK, and it should show you right there.
Okay. So the question here often comes up about Apache CouchDB versus Couchbase DB. We're a different product. So Apache CouchDB is an open source product, and there are a lot of differences in terms of our multi-model support with all the built-in services, our support, advanced support of SQL, our support of transactions. Are another thing that makes us different, and also our delivery of database as a service. So we have a dedicated page that you can find if you search for Couchbase versus CouchDB that goes into more details, but those are kind of the big factors of the differences between the two. Let's see here. How is it to import Oracle data dump into Couchbase? Maybe Rick, you can talk specifically about Oracle, but I know that one of our colleagues has produced a video where he took a Microsoft SQL Server database, one of their sample databases, and was able to import it directly into Couchbase, and it carried over all of the tables and all of the structures. Again, this is tied to the dynamic data model that we've built into Couchbase Server 7 that Rick highlighted and I highlighted with the scopes and collections and the multiple tiers. And that utility he built for SQL Server 7 is out on GitHub. So, and Rick, I think in terms of Oracle, it's pretty similar that in terms of the structures within an Oracle database could be pulled right into Couchbase, right?
Yes. So Matt did it for a SQL Server, I believe, but the process would be the same for other relational databases. So that includes Oracle, Postgres, whatever. The process is going to be similar.
Okay. There was a question about eventing. Can you talk a little bit more about eventing? Just expand on how it works.
Yeah, so the eventing service is basically works as kind of like a trigger would in a a relational database. So you can say when X action happens, then do Y. So you can use that. You can actually also use that for transferring data over to Couchbase. So one of the early questions was how do you move data into Couchbase? You actually could use the eventing service to trigger an SQL statement that actually helps you move that data in. With eventing, I generally use additional code. So I'll call my code from the eventing service, and my code can do whatever. So my code could be moving data into Couchbase based on certain criteria that are triggered by the eventing service.
Okay. There was a question about all the supported SQL++ commands. If on the Couchbase website, or if you search Couchbase and N1QL, so that's the old name. Again, as we're going through this rebranding process, there's a page dedicated to the query language, which does have links, a lot of information about the query language, and a cheat sheet guide that has all the details. And there is a lot of information out there about all the commands that are available. I can follow up with you after the session and send you that link. So let's see here. Sorry, just. So a question about, does Couchbase offer any free license of Couchbase for instructors and students? So actually, yes, we have. So the Couchbase Capella trial that we've mentioned is a 30-day free trial, but there is also a downloadable community edition that is free to use, and that's available from our downloads page on the Couchbase website. It said the SDK examples didn't appear to include Ruby. Are there Ruby templates and examples?
That is possible. So again, because I don't use Ruby myself, I've never looked for Ruby in the UI, but it is possible that we support it as an SDK, but the example is not in the Capella UI as of yet.
But there are definitely Ruby examples on the documentation site. So
yes, correct.
Okay. There's been some questions about the video and demo link. So we'll work on trying to either share that link, but on the Couchbase Capella web page, there are some demo videos there. And when you join the free trial, we have a new video that our developer advocacy team is putting together. It's about a 20-minute video that includes a lot of the material that Rick had and some additional aspects about a trial application and how to connect that. And that should be released in the coming days. So if you join the trial, we'll make sure that you gain access to that video as well. Let me see. Rick, the question about primary keys and foreign key constraints. You want to talk about how we handle that and what the options are for customers and how they do their database design in terms of keys and linking?
Yeah, so if you nest the documents, then there's really no need for a foreign key. So in a relational database, you'll have a foreign key to connect tables, right? But in Couchbase, generally, you'll have one document, and what might be a separate table in a relational database is going to be nested within that document. So then you don't really need a foreign key.
Okay. I think that's about it. So I may have missed a question too, and I apologize. It's a new interface for us. The font's a little small. I'm trying to scroll through the questions. If we missed your question, we'll try and follow up with you after the fact. But I think that's pretty much it for now. So thank you for joining. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please go to the Capella trial, sign up, no credit card needed. There's a lot of more information in there, and we'd love for you to try it out. So thank you very much.